The gold-embossed invitation arrived on a Tuesday, catching the afternoon light as I picked it up from my doormat. Honouring the legacy of Thea Blackwood, it read in elegant calligraphy. I stared at it, perplexed. At 67, I was very much alive, and my 3 children had never been ones for formal celebrations. Something about this felt off. I placed the invitation on my kitchen counter and studied it more carefully. The event was scheduled for 2 weeks from Saturday at the Grand Meridian Hotel, the most expensive venue in our city. Black tie, optional. A 3-course dinner followed by tributes and reflections. Tributes, I murmured to my empty kitchen, where I'd prepared countless meals for my now-grown children. As if I'm already dead. I picked up my phone and called my oldest, Zara. She answered on the 3rd ring, the background noise suggesting she was at her office. Mum, did you get it? Her voice had an artificial brightness that immediately put me on guard. Yes, I'm looking at it now. What exactly is this about? Well, Nolan, Vega and I have been planning it for months, she said, naming my son and younger daughter. We thought it was time to properly acknowledge everything you've done for us. People from every part of your life will be there. Even Aunt Isolde is flying in. Isolde, but she hasn't travelled in years because of her arthritis. She made an exception. That's how important this is. I let the silence stretch, hoping she'd fill it with more details, perhaps reveal whatever was being hidden beneath this sudden appreciation. Thea, are you still there? She rarely called me by my first name. Why now? I asked. My birthday was 3 months ago, and none of you could make it because of work commitments. A slight hesitation. We realised we've never properly thanked you for all your sacrifices. The years of working extra jobs after Dad left, putting us through college, always being there for us. Something in her tone, a barely perceptible strain under the enthusiasm, triggered the same intuition that had helped me navigate 30 years of single parenting. Zara, I said carefully, what is this really about? It's exactly what I said, Mom. Just say you'll come. We've put a lot of effort into this. After I hung up, I stood in my kitchen, turning the invitation over in my hands. I should have felt touched. Instead, I felt uneasy. For decades, I'd worked double shifts as a hospital radiologist to ensure my children never felt the economic impact of their father's abandonment. I'd sacrificed sleep, relationships, and my own dreams to give them opportunities. Now that they were successful, Zara a corporate attorney, Nolan an architect, Vega a research scientist, they'd grown increasingly distant, calling only when they needed something. Despite my reservations, I confirmed my attendance. Whatever this was, I would face it with the same quiet dignity I'd maintained through every challenge life had thrown my way. Over the next 2 weeks, I received calls from old friends and colleagues, all confirming they'd be at the event. Isolde called to discuss her travel arrangements, sounding genuinely excited. Even my former mentor from my residency days, Dr. Corinna Barra, texted that he'd be flying in for the occasion. The evening before the event, I visited my favourite boutique, where I found a deep, emerald dress that the owner assured me complemented my silver hair beautifully, while gracefully accommodating my mature figure. The kind of backhanded compliment women my age learn to accept with a smile. I splurged on having my hair professionally styled the morning of the event, something I hadn't done since Zara's wedding 5 years earlier. As I stood before my mirror, fastening a pair of pearl earrings my mother had given me on my medical school graduation, I hardly recognised myself. The woman reflected back at me looked poised, elegant, not at all like someone who'd spent decades working 18-hour shifts, surviving on hospital cafeteria coffee and determination. My neighbour's son, a college student home for spring break, offered to drive me to the venue. "So you can enjoy a glass of champagne, Dr. Blackwood," he'd said kindly. The Grand Meridian exceeded even its reputation for opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables adorned with elaborate floral arrangements. A stage had been set up at one end, complete with a podium and microphone. A string quartet played softly in one corner. As I entered, heads turned. I recognised former colleagues from the hospital, neighbours, old friends from my medical school days, and extended family members I hadn't seen in years. Before I could feel overwhelmed, Nolan appeared at my side, handsome in a tuxedo that likely cost more than I used to make in a month. "Mom," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek, "you look stunning." "Thank you," I replied, searching his face for clues. "This is quite something." "Only the best for the woman who made us who we are," he said, but his eyes slid away from mine too quickly. "Let me show you to your table. It's front and center." As he guided me through the crowd, I recognized Dr. Ibarra among those already seated at my table, along with Isolde and my oldest friend, Tempest. Several other tables were filled with people I knew from different parts of my life, but there were also faces I didn't recognize. Polished, affluent-looking individuals who watched me with curious interest. "Thea!" Dr. Ibarra stood to greet me, taking my hands in his. "It's been too long." "Corin, I didn't expect to see you here," I said, genuinely pleased. He had been an excellent mentor and friend during the challenging years of my residency. "I wouldn't have missed it," he said, but something in his expression made my unease deepen. Before I could question him, Vega appeared with champagne flutes. "A toast," she announced, distributing them, "to Mom, who's about to receive the recognition she's always deserved." The phrasing sent another ripple of disquiet through me, but I smiled and accepted the glass. Zara joined us moments later, elegant in a silver dress that brought out the same amber eyes she'd inherited from her father. "Everything's ready," she told her siblings in a low voice. "We should start soon." "Start what exactly?" I asked. "The program," Nolan said. "Speeches first, then a special presentation, then dinner." "That sounds rather formal for a family celebration." "This isn't just family, Mom," Zara said, gesturing at the room, which had filled with at least 100 people. "This is everyone who's been impacted by your dedication over the years." Before I could respond, Nolan stepped onto the stage and approached the microphone. The room quieted immediately. "Good evening, everyone," he said, his architect's voice carrying effortlessly through the space. "Thank you all for coming to honor my remarkable mother, Dr. Thea Blackwood." Applause followed, and I forced a smile while fighting the impulse to shrink in my seat. "Many of you know pieces of my mother's story," Nolan continued. "How she raised 3 children on her own after our father left. How she worked 60-hour weeks at the hospital while somehow managing to attend every important event in our lives. How she put all 3 of us through college without a penny of support from our father." More applause. I maintained my smile, though public enumeration of my sacrifices made me deeply uncomfortable. "But what you might not know," Nolan said, his tone shifting slightly, "is that those sacrifices came with a cost, not just to her, but to everyone around her." The room went silent. My hands tightened around the stem of my champagne flute. "Mum never let us forget what she gave up for us," he continued. "Every opportunity she passed on, every dream she deferred. It all became part of the narrative of what we owed her. The burden of her sacrifice shaped our childhoods and continues to influence our adult lives in ways we're only beginning to understand." I felt the blood drain from my face. Tempest reached over to place her hand over mine, a gesture of support that confirmed this was going exactly where I feared. Vega took the stage next, accepting the microphone from her brother. Her scientific training had given her a calm, authoritative presence. "As someone with a doctorate in clinical psychology," she began, "I've come to recognize the patterns of emotional obligation in our family as a textbook case of what we call a martyr complex. Mom's sacrifices were real, we don't deny that, but they were also weapons, tools of emotional manipulation that left lasting damage." Murmurs rippled through the audience. I sat perfectly still, my back rigid, refusing to visibly react, though I felt as if I'd been physically struck. Zara joined her siblings on stage, taking the microphone next. "We organised this event as a form of intervention," she explained to the crowd. "Not just for ourselves, but for everyone who's been caught in our mother's web of sacrifice and obligation. Today is about acknowledging the truth, breaking dysfunctional patterns, and hopefully beginning a healthier chapter for all of us, including Mom. The room blurred as tears threatened. I blinked them back furiously. They had arranged this elaborate setup, this public humiliation disguised as a celebration, to confront me, to air our family's private matters before friends, colleagues, and strangers. As I sat there, a strange calm began to replace my initial shock. Decades of holding my tongue when their father criticized me in front of them, years of swallowing my disappointment when they forgot my birthday or dismissed my concerns, a lifetime of prioritizing their feelings above my own, all of it crystallized into a clarity I hadn't experienced before. I watched as my children took turns at the microphone, detailing my supposed psychological manipulations. They had prepared a slideshow featuring family photos alongside bullet-pointed lists of martyrdom behaviors and emotional taxation. Some guests looked uncomfortable, others nodded in recognition, and a few seemed to be enjoying the spectacle with unseemly enthusiasm. Dr. Ibarra leaned toward me. "Thea, do you want to leave? I'd be happy to escort you out." I patted his hand. "Thank you, Corin, but no. I think it's time I had my say." On stage, Zara was introducing what she called testimony from others. To my horror, my sister Isolde stood up shakily from our table and made her way to the stage with Nolan's assistance. My own sister. The betrayal stung sharper than anything my children had said. Isolde spoke briefly, her voice quavering as she recounted how I had always positioned myself as the stronger sister, the one who carried the heavier burden, making her feel inadequate by comparison. When she finished and was helped back to her seat, she couldn't meet my eyes. Several others followed, former colleagues, a cousin, even my neighbour, who complained that my excessive self-sufficiency made it difficult to connect with me as a friend. Each testimony was met with thoughtful nods from my children, who had appointed themselves judges at this tribunal disguised as a tribute. Finally, Nolan announced it was time for the intervention portion of the evening. He invited me to the stage. "Mom," he said, his voice gentle now, as if he were speaking to a difficult patient rather than his mother, "we invite you to join us up here. This is your opportunity to acknowledge these patterns and commit to change. We're doing this because we love you and want a healthier relationship moving forward." If I'm being honest about that moment, I'll admit that a small conditioned part of me wanted to apologize, to take responsibility for their unhappiness, as I had always done. The weight of public expectation, the eyes of everyone I knew, fixed upon me, the lifetime habit of smoothing things over for the sake of family peace. These forces pulled at me like gravity. But something else rose up stronger. I stood, smoothed the front of my emerald dress, and walked to the stage with measured steps. The room was utterly silent. Nolan offered his hand as I climbed the 3 small stairs, but I ignored it, approaching the microphone with my spine straight and my head high. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my radiologist's voice carrying clearly through the room. "Especially those who travelled from out of state to be here. I know some of you came all the way to Florida for this occasion, and I appreciate the effort." I paused, surveying the room. My children stood awkwardly to the side of the stage, clearly uncertain about what would come next, but seemingly confident in their power to control the situation if necessary. When I received the invitation to this event, I was surprised and touched. It's not often that a 67-year-old widow is celebrated with such elaborate arrangements. I gestured to the elegant room. Now I understand that this was never meant to be a celebration at all, but rather a public trial. Uncomfortable shifting rippled through the audience. "My children believe I've weaponized my sacrifices," I continued. "They're right that I sacrificed. When their father left us for his 26-year-old research assistant and moved to Europe, I worked 80-hour weeks to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. When college tuition bills came due, I took extra night shifts and sold the jewelry their father had given me during happier times." I looked directly at Nolan. "I missed exactly one of your architectural model presentations in 4 years of college, Nolan. It was when Zara had appendicitis and Vega had broken her ankle in a soccer injury on the same weekend. You didn't speak to me for 3 weeks afterward." His face flushed, but I had already turned to Zara. "When you needed funds for your unpaid legal internship in Washington, I postponed my first vacation in 9 years to cover your expenses. You thanked me by telling your friends you were embarrassed that I still drove my 10-year-old car instead of upgrading to something more befitting a physician." Vega at least had the grace to look down when I turned to her. "And you, Vega? When you called from graduate school having a breakdown before your doctoral defense, I drove 5 hours in the middle of a snowstorm to be with you, then drove back immediately after your successful presentation to perform 3 scheduled surgeries. You never mentioned it again." I returned my attention to the wider audience. My children believe I remind them too often of what I gave up for them. The truth is, I rarely spoke of my sacrifices because I didn't see them as sacrifices at the time. They were simply what was necessary. What my children are really upset about is that I finally, after all 3 of them were established in successful careers, began to build a life for myself. I drew a deep breath. 3 years ago, I retired from full-time practice and used my savings to open a small wellness clinic for underserved women. I joined a medical mission group and began taking 2 trips a year to provide care in countries without adequate medical infrastructure. I started dating again. Nothing serious, but enough to no longer be available at a moment's notice for childcare or emotional support. The room was so quiet I could hear the gentle hum of the air conditioning. Suddenly, the mother who had organised her entire existence around her children's needs had interests and priorities of her own. How inconvenient for them. My voice remained steady, though my heart raced. When I declined to babysit because I had a fundraiser for my clinic, when I couldn't drop everything to help Zara prepare for a dinner party because I was preparing for a mission trip, when I missed Nolan's son's piano recital because I was in Guatemala performing life-saving procedures, that's when my martyr complex apparently became a problem worthy of this intervention. I looked directly at my children again, standing uncomfortably at the edge of the stage. "I have never mentioned this publicly before, and I wouldn't now if you hadn't chosen to air our private matters in this inappropriate forum. When your father left, he offered me a choice: full custody of you 3 with minimal financial support, or a divorce settlement that would have given me financial security but meant you would split your time between us. Half the year in Europe with him and his new partner. There was no legal requirement for him to give me that choice." I paused, letting the implications sink in. "I chose you. I chose a harder path because I believed it was better for you to have stability. That wasn't martyrdom. That was love." Tears were streaming down Zara's face now. Vega looked stunned. Nolan's composure had cracked, showing the uncertainty beneath. "You arranged this elaborate event to shame me into resuming my role as your ever-available support system. Instead, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to walk out that door with whatever remaining dignity you've left me. Those of you who came as voyeurs have had your entertainment for the evening. Those who came as friends, real friends, are welcome to join me at my clinic, where I'll be opening a bottle of good wine and ordering takeout." I stepped back from the microphone, then leaned in one more time. "Oh, and one more thing. I've been seeing a wonderful man for the past 4 months, a retired pediatric surgeon I met at a medical conference. We're taking an Alaskan cruise next month. I'll send postcards." Without waiting for a response, I walked off the stage, past my stunned children, and through the centre of the ballroom. Conversations erupted behind me as I moved, but I didn't look back. My hands were trembling, but my steps were sure. Outside, the evening air felt cool against my flushed skin. I stood for a moment, wondering if I had just committed social suicide, if I would regret the bridges I had potentially burned. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Dr. Ibarra emerged from the venue doors, followed by Tempest, several former hospital colleagues, and a handful of others. More people followed. Not everyone, but enough to warm my heart. "Well," Tempest said, linking her arm through mine, "that was quite a speech, Thea." "Too much?" I asked, suddenly uncertain. "Just enough," Corinne assured me. And for the record, you were the finest radiologist I ever had the privilege of mentoring. Those kids have no idea what they're talking about. About that wine and takeout, one of my clinic volunteers said with a smile. My phone buzzed in my clutch. A text from Isolde. Waiting for a taxi. Save me some wine. I owe you a massive apology. If this story resonated with your soul, click subscribe and let me know in the comments which city or country you're listening from. I'm truly curious to know where you're tuning in from. The clinic was closed, of course, but I had keys. We filed in, turning on soft lights, pulling chairs into a circle. Someone found glasses, someone else connected a phone to my small speaker system and started playing Aretha Franklin. I uncorked 2 bottles of the good Cabernet I kept for special occasions, and we passed around menus from the Thai restaurant down the street. The conversation flowed easily, not about the disastrous celebration, but about recent medical advances, trips being planned, grandchildren's achievements, and local gossip. Normal life-affirming topics among friends who valued each other's company. Isolde arrived halfway through our first glass of wine, looking exhausted but determined. She hugged me tightly. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "They called me with this story about helping you work through some issues. I should have called you directly." "It's okay," I told her and found that I meant it. "How about we both agree to stop letting other people define our relationship?" The evening stretched late into the night. Friends departed in ones and twos, each hug and goodbye feeling like another strand being rewoven into the fabric of my life, a fabric that had been quietly unraveling without my full awareness. By midnight, only Tempest remained, helping me gather empty glasses and containers. "You know they'll call eventually," she said, "when the embarrassment wears off." "I expect they will," I agreed. "And I'll answer. They're still my children and I still love them. But things will be different." "Good different or bad different?" I considered the question as I rinsed a wine glass. "Just different. Honest different. Long overdue different." After Tempest left, I locked up the clinic and walked the short distance to my apartment above it, a cosy space filled with medical textbooks, art I'd collected from my mission trips, and photographs of my children and grandchildren. I didn't regret having those photos there. Despite everything, they were still the greatest accomplishments of my life. What I regretted was allowing their judgment to hold so much power over my sense of self-worth. I sat at my small desk and opened my laptop, navigating to the grant proposal I'd been working on for the past month. Funding for an expansion of the clinic to include mental health services for women in crisis. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been working to heal others while allowing my own wounds to fester. The cursor blinked on the screen, waiting. What came next? In my professional life and my personal one, I stood at a crossroads. I'd love to know if you've ever experienced something similar. Share your story in the comments below. My phone buzzed with a text. Harlan, the pediatric surgeon I'd mentioned in my speech. "How did the big celebration go?" "Not as planned," I typed back. "I'll tell you over coffee tomorrow. Looking forward to it. Sleep well, Thea." I smiled at the simple kindness of those words. Sleep well. When was the last time someone had wished me that? Had genuinely cared about the quality of my rest, the peace of my mind as I drifted off to sleep. Another text arrived, this one from Zara. "Mum, I don't even know what to say. Can we talk tomorrow?" I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. "Yes, come to the clinic at 2. Just you." Setting the phone aside, I returned to my grant proposal and began to type. The words came easily now, flowing from some newly tapped source deep within. My project would not be diminished by setbacks. It would not apologise for claiming space in the medical community. It would move forward with purpose and strength, offering healing without surrendering its mission. As I wrote into the early hours of the morning, I felt a sense of alignment I hadn't experienced before. The physician I was on the page becoming the woman I was in life. The boundaries between professional and personal blurring in the most constructive way possible. The conversation with Zara the next day was difficult but necessary. She arrived at the clinic with red-rimmed eyes and a defensive posture that gradually softened as we talked. There were tears on both sides, admissions of hurt feelings and misunderstood intentions. We didn't resolve everything. How could we in one afternoon? But we established a framework for moving forward that acknowledged both her feelings and my right to self-determination. Nolan called that evening, his architect's precision making his apologies sound somewhat rehearsed, but nonetheless sincere. Vega took longer, almost a week, before stopping by the clinic unannounced with a peace offering of my favourite pastries and an invitation to speak at her university's Women in Science Symposium, something she'd never offered before. The Alaskan cruise with Harlan was everything I'd hoped for. Glacier tours, wildlife sightings, leisurely meals, and conversations that stretched late into the night. I sent postcards to my children as promised, but I also sent them to friends, to my clinic staff, to Corinne and Tempest and Isolde, expanding the circle of people with whom I shared my joy. When I returned, tanned and rested, I found my little clinic had become something of a local phenomenon. Apparently word had spread about my performance at the Grand Meridian. Women my age and older stopped by, some shyly, some boldly, to tell me their own stories of invisibility and rediscovered strength. I began hosting informal gatherings after hours, dignity circles we called them, where wine flowed and stories were exchanged without judgment. My relationship with my children settled into a new pattern, less frequent contact, but more meaningful when it occurred. They still sometimes slipped into old expectations, and I occasionally fell back into the habit of over-accommodating, but we caught ourselves more quickly, corrected course more gracefully. The grant was approved by fall, allowing me to expand the clinic and hire a part-time therapist. By winter, we were serving twice as many women, providing not just physical care, but emotional support for those navigating life's transitions. My first formal fundraiser was held in the clinic itself, the room packed with supporters old and new, my children and grandchildren included among them, visibly proud despite our complicated history. As I stood at the podium that evening, so different from the one at the Grand Meridian, I looked out at the faces turned toward me, expectant, supportive, curious, and felt a profound sense of having come full circle. The woman who had once organised her entire existence around others' needs now stood confidently in her own light, sharing her voice, claiming her space. Life doesn't offer many perfect resolutions. Relationships remain works in progress. Old habits reassert themselves in moments of stress or fatigue. But that night, addressing a roomful of people who valued what I had to say, I understood something essential. Dignity isn't a destination you reach once and for all. It's a practice, a daily choice, a constant recalibration of how much of yourself you're willing to compromise and how firmly you'll stand your ground. My children arranged a party to mock me. They froze when they heard what I said on stage. But the real story wasn't in that dramatic moment of confrontation. It was in the quiet aftermath, in the steady rebuilding of self-respect and the gradual transformation of relationships. It was in learning, at 67, that it's never too late to begin again. It's never too late to speak your truth. It's never too late to claim the life you want. If you haven't subscribed yet, click the button now to join our community of women who refuse to be invisible. You'll find stories like this one every day, stories that remind us all that sometimes the quietest response speaks the loudest. Remember, it's never too late to reclaim your power. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.